Aloha, welcome to the video. So this video I'm going to be finishing two pieces. I'm going to be working on a kunai, which is a little dagger. You see it a lot in the Naruto series. It's like a ninja knife. And then I'm also going to be making a chef's knife. So I had a little bit of challenges with both, actually, and we'll go through that. I got to the point that I actually wasn't sure if I was going to be able to finish this week, just because of the challenges that came across. So I really liked this piece of wood that I had here originally, just because I liked the two-tone. So there's the darker coal wood, and then it contrasts into the lighter coal wood. What that is the edge of the tree. So the light koa is the edge wood, and that darker koa wood is the heartwood or inner rings of the tree. So the light wood is usually softer, but I love pieces that have this contrasting look. So I was really interested on making that the handle of the kunai. The original plan was I was going to inset the wood into the swordfish bill. And that's what I'm doing here is I'm hollowing out the swordfish bill. But as I was doing that, I think I was applying too much pressure, and I ended up cracking and breaking that section. There might have already been a crack there, and the increased pressure from me pushing that on that ruined that. And so I kind of decided that that's probably not going to be a very structurally sound joint or connection point between the two, and so I decided I was going to change it up and do a little bit different of a connection. I'm going to be doing something similar to a tongue and groove. And so I'm going to go ahead and prep this bill. So I noticed there was a hole down in that center. So I'm going to be cutting out the outer two edges, and the swordfish bill is going to be the tongue section. But this section here is hollowed out, and so I needed to fill it with some epoxy. And so while that's setting, I decided to go ahead and migrate over to the chef's knife. And I noticed I had the tip cut wrong. I had cut it with the angle going the wrong direction, so I went ahead and fixed that. And now what I'm doing is I'm prepping the bill. I did want to inset the swordfish bill into the wood, similar to like a mortise and tenon, but I wanted the wood to come up to a more seamless connection, almost like the wood and the marlin bill were the same dimensions. I thought that would be the coolest look, and so that's what I'm doing here is I'm bringing this down. And I was a little bit concerned just because the strongest portions of the swordfish bill and marlin bills are the same way, is the outside of the bill, just because it's a bone structure, and so the inside tends to be either hollow or it's softer material. And that's just similar to all bone, is pretty much the same. But I shaped that down, and then I had glued these two pieces together here, again to make a two-tone look, because I really liked it, but I thought it'd be cool to have this darker koa wood with this lighter koa wood. So that isn't one piece, that's two pieces glued together. And now I'm going to be hollowing out the center. I decided to do a little bit similar to what I've seen knife makers do when they do a hidden tang. And they'll drill out the center, and then they'll clean that up with some chisels. So I've already done quite a bit of chisel work on this piece, and you can see here that it almost fits, but it's not quite snug. So I'm going to be cleaning up that section there so it's a little bit more loose fitting, or at least enough that I can slide it in. So I'm just going back and forth between the chisel set and the drill, and slowly testing with this to make sure I have a good fit. I'm doing a little bit more sanding down with my metal file on the swordfish bill. That's just so that I have a really clean, nice, snug fit. It was a little bit of a pain to get this going. I haven't really done this style of connection before, so it was a little bit of a learning curve for me. But I did like how it was coming together. The bill slid all the way in. I got that nice and good and set, and it was actually a pretty solid connection. You can see here, it was kind of hard to pull that out. I got a little bit nervous that I might not be able to pull it out in the end, so that would have been a too tight of a fit. So now that I have this pretty much shaped and into where it's going to be, it has a slight curve on it, but there's a lot of material left on the handle, and so I'm not too worried. I'm going to shape down the handle. I did make a mistake right here. So my plan was to shape down the handle to match the curve of the blade. And I did that just so that I was planning on doing that just so that it would kind of hide that angle that was on the blade. And so what I did is I cut off those two sections on the bandsaw, though, forgetting about that, to bring the handle material down so that there would be less shaping. And this will come into, you'll see here in just a little bit. But I went ahead and shaped this generally. I noticed that my angle grinder pad was burning the material, and that tends to happen when it gets gummed up or it's not as solid. So I went ahead and swapped it out for a new one, and this one was cutting really clean. Very little burning, so this is a lot better for the shaping that I'm going to do. I really like how this turned out so far. I mean, that just looked awesome. I'm not going to be able to sharpen it as sharp as a regular chef's knife. Obviously, the profile is too wide, but it does look really cool. So I'm really liking the way that it's turning out. It's a little thinner than I was originally imagining in my mind, but that's not too bad. I decided to put a peg in place here. It probably doesn't need it. Once I epoxy everything together, it's going to be a pretty tight, strong hold. But I decided I wanted to put in a peg on here. One, because I thought it would look kind of cool. And the other reason is because I wanted it to have a better mechanical hold, keeping the blade in place. It's not going to be used, but I do like it so that if it is used for something, it still holds. It doesn't immediately, fall apart. So the peg that I'm putting in there is just a 1/4-inch dowel. So I drilled in a hole, and then I'm going to go ahead and epoxy all that together and then let that sit. So while that's sitting, I'll let that sit for 24 hours before I get back to it. I'm going to go ahead and get back to the kunai. So this has been already sitting now for a full day, and it's ready to start doing some work on it. So I went ahead and cut out the tongue section of that tongue and groove joint, and then I cut out the groove section in this wood. I cut it too wide. I don't know if I mismeasured it. I was going a little bit too fast, and I cut it far too wide. And I don't like it being that wide because then you can see more of the epoxy in the joint, and I really don't like that at all. I like it to be a cleaner fit, but because I had to cut it shorter, it was now too short, and so I was looking for another piece of wood. And then I came across this material here. This was from a piece I made a long time ago, and this is just leftover. And I thought, you know what, this would make for a perfect handle. It was a beautiful contrasting of the dark and the different colors of coal wood. And I thought, you know what, for the kunai, this would probably be the best thing, because it's kind of I guess it's not completely fantasy, but the design that I'm going for takes from fantasy, and so I think it would just make for a better shape. So I went ahead and cut out the groove inside the handle material with the bandsaw, and this time I cut it right. It was very snug. In fact, I needed to finish it up with the metal file just so that it would be a little bit cleaner and be able to slide into place. Now that that's a nice snug fit, I'm going to go ahead and mix up some epoxy. I did mix some wood shavings in with the material just so that it kind of bind a little bit better. The handle itself does have epoxy on it anyway, and so I'm pretty confident that this is going to make a pretty good joint. I'm filling in all the way around. I'm going to be grinding most of that down, but my hope is that it fills in any gaps and it's a nice strong hold. I did notice on the tip of the kunai there was a little bit of a hole in the swordfish bill, so I went ahead and filled that with some of the leftover epoxy that I had and let that set. So now I'm back on the chef's knife, and this is the next day. So it's already been a couple days now that I've been working on this, and as I started to shape down the knife, I kind of noticed that I wasn't really a big fan of that peg. I thought I was going to like it originally, but I don't know, for some reason I didn't like it. And then I noticed immediately that my shape was off, and so here I am trying to kind of bend it. Oh, and I snapped it. Oh, so that was such a stupid thing for me to do. I still can't believe I did that. It's not metal, so it's not going to bend. The swordfish bills and the marlin bills do have a little bit of flex to them, but you can't bend them into place. They either will go back to their original shape or they will break. There's no in between. And I was kind of worried about this anyway because I had shaved down the strongest portions of the swordfish bill, that outer section, and so I was left with just the weaker inner section. But this was heartbreaking. So I called it a day. I left. I said, you know what, whatever. So this is the next day. So it's already been, I think, 3 or 4 days now. So I am kind of in a crunch mode. I've got very little time. The good news is I actually do like the shape of this blade. I do want one a little bigger. And so what I'm doing here is I'm following the general shape of the blade, but I am going to be making this a little bit longer so that I have a larger chef's knife. So I cut that on the bandsaw. The second thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to leave as much material as possible on the handle. I'm not going to be shaving that down. That way it's nice and snug, nice and strong. So I found some additional material that was similar to the last material, some darker coal wood along with some lighter coal wood. So I'm going to go ahead and put those together just like I did the previous material. Now the only thing with this darker piece is it had some wood rot in it, so it was kind of soft wood. At the end, I think I ended up liking that look and feel better, but it was definitely a different material. So while that's setting, I'm going to go ahead and move back over to the kunai. Now at this point in time, it's looking awesome. I'm cutting off some of the outer edges just so there's a little bit less shaping to do. But you can see right there the contrast between the epoxy and the coal wood looks just gnarly. I love it. So the first step after cutting off those excess is I'm going to be drilling in the hole. Now you'll notice that I'm kind of going back and forth between both sides. I'm doing that so that it doesn't walk. What I mean by that is when I've tried to drill all the way through, I don't have a drill press, and the bit, because I'm not going perfectly down, it tends to walk, and so I'll drill on both sides, and you get a lot cleaner, straighter hole. So the next step here is I'm going to be carving in some lines on the handle. I was kind of debating how I wanted the handle to look, and I settled in on these just straight lines rather than a spiral. I thought the straight lines would look a little bit cooler and give it a little bit better texture to hold on to. So I used my tungsten carbide bit, went ahead and grooved in those. And then before I went too far, I decided I wanted to add some pearl inlay. The joint on the tongue and groove, it does look nice. I do like it, but I wasn't a big fan of that straight line. So I decided to put in a pearl inset, these circles. It's actually going to be more of an inlay. It's going to be flush, but this is going to kind of obscure or hide the joint and give a little bit more contrast to the piece. And so I cut it down to size using my grinder, and then using this drill bit with that same size, I'm cutting in the hole and super gluing it into place. The first step before I start shaping is I really need to work down that pearl, and I'm using the metal file to do that. The reason for that is the wood is softer than the pearl, and so if I start sanding right away, the wood's going to sand faster than the pearl is, and it'll make it very difficult for it to be flush. So I use the metal file to kind of bring it down, and then after that I can start sanding. Sanding in the hand grooves was kind of a pain. I ended up wrapping the sanding discs around my metal files and trying to use that to help sand in those sections. I ended up also just rolling up the sanding discs to sand in between them. It was just kind of a mixture of both, going back and forth and then cleaning up the edge work. I am going to be sanding this piece down to 320 grit. I'm not going to take it further, primarily because I actually don't have any further grit. But once I got it to 320, it's now time to oil. Now this piece, I was so excited to oil this piece. Just because of all the different contrasting looks, the swordfish bill, the epoxy, the pearl inlay, the coal wood, I just knew it was going to look awesome. And so The entire time I was sanding, I was just almost wanting to skip steps and get straight to here. One thing you have to be careful with though is you do want to make sure that it is fully sanded. Any types of scratches or gouges they show up more once you oil it. And I think it's because of the light that gets reflected, but you definitely want to make sure everything is sanded and looking nice and smooth. But man, did this look just awesome. So the pearl inlay is white and gold mother of pearl. And then obviously it's almost like a pattern mix, although it's just a combination of dark epoxy and different grains of koa wood. And that just looks awesome. So now while that is sitting, I can go ahead and get back to the chef's knife. So the first step on the chef knives is I need to remove the outermost layer of the swordfish bill. I'm not going deep at all on this. I'm being very, very light, very gentle. And what I'm doing there is I'm just removing the bumpy sandpaper feel from the outer edge. If you don't remove that, it's very rough. It is like a sandpaper. And so I sand that down. I actually use the grinder to grind that down, and then I sand it from there. So I'm going to follow the same steps. I'm going to be skipping a little bit here because it's the exact same steps that I did before. So I'm going to go ahead and drill that out, use my chisel set to clean it up, and then have the handle set and ready for gluing. I did decide on the second one though that I wasn't going to do a peg, just because I kind of liked the simplicity of this piece. There isn't a lot of detail on the bill. There isn't a lot of detail in the koa wood. It's not a really heavy curly koa wood. It does have curl, but just the overall piece itself is a fairly simple, rugged piece. And so I wanted to leave it with that texture. So here it is the next day. So I'm coming down to crunch time. So I let it sit a day before I start working on it. And now I'm sanding the entire thing down to 320. And that takes a little bit of time just because it's a larger bill. The different grains of koa wood are also different densities, different hardness. And so I have to be careful as I sand down the edges so that they're nice and clean. But once I get this all the way sanded down to 320 grit, same thing as before, I can get it to the point where I can start oiling it. One thing that I did want to make sure, and it's hard to tell from the videos, but there are some nice, clean, crisp edges. You'll see more of those at the end when we see the final piece. I wanted to sharpen it, but you really can't sharpen the bill. It is sharp, like you could hurt someone with it, but it's definitely not a chef's knife. So here is the oiling of this piece, and you'll notice it doesn't have quite the same characteristics as a lot of the other koa wood that I've used. It still has a little bit of that curl, but I really like this very basic look. The dark koa has that wood rot that I filled with a couple layers of oiling, but even that looks pretty awesome. Like the whole thing just looks pretty slick. I really liked it a lot. I like how it has a contrast in color, and there's almost like a hamon, and you'll see that here in just a second. So here is the finished chef's knife. So it's really hard to tell because of the light. I'm going to get a little bit closer here, but you see the edge? That almost looks like a natural hamon. It's just awesome. It just turned out beautiful. Not only that, but this bill was straighter than the other bill, and so it has a nice, straight, clean edge. The handle material looks awesome. I love the way that the lines contrast. Just a beautiful piece. Look at that. So simple, but just awesome. I wish I could cut with it. I won't be testing with either this piece or the other one. These two aren't made for that purpose. These are definitely made more for show or collection. So here is the second piece. Here is the kunai. I love how this piece turned out. It's actually balanced perfectly. The weight is right in between the joint of the marlin bill and the handle. So if you did try to throw it, I suspect it would probably throw pretty decently. Now it is natural materials, so I'm definitely not going to be throwing it, nor would I recommend anyone else. But look at that contrast in the epoxy and the koa wood. Just absolutely beautiful. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. These two pieces were a ton of work, a huge challenge. And I honestly didn't think at one point I was going to finish, especially after I broke the first chef's knife. So that was just, oh man, that was heart-wrenching. I hope you enjoy it. Please leave comments in the below. And if you liked it, subscribe. I'll see you next time. Aloha.